Zanshi is the art of taking leftovers and making something beautiful from it. Let me show you how. Hi everyone, it's Steph and welcome to another video. I have been looking hard at my huge basket of leftovers. I need to do something with it as it's more than full and I know I just can't go and get another basket. These are all ends of weaving, bits that I've cut off the loom, basically loom waste, sometimes called thrums. And some of them are a pretty decent length. I also have this other little basket of extra bits that I've wound off shuttles at the end of a project or just those last few winds left on a cone. So I have all of these as well. Normally I would use the thrums in stuffing of pet beds or stuffing of pillows and things like that, and the stuff I've wound off shuttles I would put in a project. But I actually came across this term, zanchi, and immediately knew that I needed to give this a go. So zanchi is the Japanese term for leftovers, and from leftovers weaving them into zanchi ori, which is basically cloth woven from leftovers. And then I thought, I wonder what I could make from all of this. So I've taken a slight left turn on all of my projects, and don't worry, I'll still be coming back to them, but I really wanted to give this a go. So I started sorting through all my leftovers and bits and pieces, having a look and seeing what I've got. I kind of pulled out all of the cotton because the majority of the stuff I have in my leftovers basket is cotton. I also pulled out some silk, some cottolin and some crochet cotton, but I thought all of these would be suitable for this zanchi project. Researching zanchi, I found some beautiful examples where low profile knots were used and embraced as part of the cloth without trimming them, just letting them get woven in as they go. And then this cloth was called zanchi ori. So that's what I did. I want to show you this low profile weaver's knot that I found when I googled it online. It looks more complicated than what it is. I found it fiddly to start with, but after a while you kind of just get into the rhythm of it. If you make a loop on one end of the thread, then take your second piece of thread and put it through from the back of the loop. Then you bring it around the back, then over, then underneath that second bit of yarn, and then pull both ends tight. It actually makes a really strong knot that is strong enough for warp and definitely strong enough for weft. So that one's called the weaver's knot. You can Google it yourself if you want more info. So I sat in front of the TV with a mixture of long and short threaded leftovers and just started knotting them together, and then as I wound them into a ball using my ball winder. So I did 2 balls of warm, neutrally kind of colours, and then 2 balls of cooler colours, which is what I used for this zanchi project. So these 2 balls of the warmer, neutral colours I'll use for a different project, maybe something similar like bags or a backpack or something like that. But I will put them aside for now, and we'll use these cooler colours, these 2 balls here, for the bags that I'm going to make today. So here is the equipment I'll be using for this project. I'll be using my 60 centimetre or 24 inch Rigid Heddle Loom, and I'll be using my trusty coat rack and clamps as the peg. I'll be using some scissors and obviously my warping hook, and I'll be using this cottolin for the warp. I've had this in my stash for a while. It's the 8-2 size. And I'll be using the 10 dent reed, and I've already marked out the width here in the orange scrap yarn. And my usual setup is I'll put my coat rack down one end of my dining table and attach my loom to the other end of my dining table. And the dining table length is 1.9 meters long, which is around 76 inches. The width of the weaving in the reed is 55 centimeters, which works out to be around 21 3/4 inches. You can take it all the way to the edges and make it bigger if you want, but I usually like to keep a little bit at each edge. I just find it a little bit easier to weave with. I attach my heddle to the apron rod, and that just helps with tension whilst warping and keeping it nice and even, and then I can get started warping. So I'm using the 8-2 Cotylin for the warp. I'll be doubling this, so I'll be pulling the threads through every hole and every slot. And the Cotylin is just a little bit stronger, so it's perfect for fabric for a bag. This was, by the way, the quickest warp up ever. It was so easy and so quick. I'm pretty sure I warped this up in around about 35 minutes. It was amazingly quick, and sometimes I forget how easy it is to warp up in one colour without having to do the colour and weave and changing colours. So I got the last thread all tied off, and then I was ready to wind on. Just in case you are unfamiliar with Cotylin, I forgot to mention that Cotylin is a 50-50 mix of cotton and linen, just in case you were wondering. So before winding on, I'm double checking to make sure I haven't missed any slots or any holes, and I'll be using thick brown paper as a warp separator. And also, because I'm using my dining table, I'm just winding on straight towards the pegs, which is nice and easy and quick. Just remember to pull back slightly as you're winding on so that the threads go on nice and even, and that really helps with tension on your back beam. The great thing about doubling your warp using an 8-2 cotton and warping through all your slots and all your holes is that there's no threading, which is so much easier. So here I'm just nipping off all of my ends. Once I've got them snipped off, I'm going to grab a group of 8 doubled threads, and then I'm going to pop a knot down the very bottom because I'll be lashing on today and not tying on. I find lashing on, you just don't have quite so much waste as with tying on, and I don't need a fringe or anything, so this would be my preferred method for this project. To lash on, I'm grabbing some scrap yarn that is around about 5 times the width of the loom, and I'm tying one end onto my apron rod, then grabbing a group of 8 doubled threads. I'm dividing them in half, dropping the yarn through the top and around the bottom of the apron rod, and then pulling nice and tight. I'll continue this throughout the whole length of the knotted groups, and every so often I'll stop and just tighten that up as you go. When you tighten it up, the threads become a little tighter on the back beam. So by tightening up as you go, it just gives it the best chance for some nice even tension. So once that's done, I'll check the tension by strumming at the back of the heddle. Once I'm happy, I'll tie off the scrap yarn, and then it's time to spread the warp. To spread the warp, I throw one pick with scrap yarn, and I don't beat but change sheds and throw another pick. Again, don't beat, and then change sheds and throw a third pick. Then you want to beat those 3 picks down together all the way down to the knots. Just need to make sure down the bottom that it's nice and even, you've got a nice straight line. Then repeat, so 3 more picks with no beating, and then beat those 3 picks down again, and that's usually all I need to do to spread my warp, and I'm ready to start weaving. It's also okay if you need to tighten up and wind the front beam on just a little bit as well. I wound one entire ball onto a shuttle and started weaving, and I was actually so thrilled. I tried to do, when I was knotting them together, a light colour and then a dark colour next to it, and it's just come out so pretty. Here you can see where the knots are. I've not trimmed them, I've just let them be woven into the fabric and just embracing that, and this is what it's looking like. It's looking amazing, and I'm just loving the colour changes and the interest. This was actually really exciting to weave because I had absolutely no idea how it was going to turn out. Whereas with other projects, I've already planned it. I've planned it on I Weave It. I've done colour cards and I know roughly how it's going to look. But this one, you just had absolutely no idea until you actually weave it. And I'm just loving how it looks. I'm thrilled. Before I knew it, I was onto the second ball of yarn and winding it onto the shuttle. I actually wove this in 2 nights after work. So I've done a whole day of work, come home, and then in 2 nights I finished weaving all of this together because I was just so excited when I was weaving it all up. It's amazing. So here is where you can see the value of the TechSolve cord upgrade that I did. I can now take the weaving pretty much all the way to the heddle. The shed was very small in the up shed and it was a little bit of a wriggle to get it through, but it just means that the waste yarn was only a few inches instead of, you know, like a foot or more of waste yarn. And this is one of the reasons that I really wanted to do the TechSolve upgrade, is just to minimize that waste, which by the way is ironic considering that now I've got a way to use the waste yarn and make something beautiful. So who knew? Also, in one of those amazing coincidences, the 2 balls of yarn that I wound up was absolutely the perfect length for this project, especially using the TechSolve upgrade that I used, and it absolutely perfectly ended like at the last bit of scrap yarn. Anywho, I cut the weaving from the loom and here is what it is looking like. Some really beautiful, cool colors that work really well together. Some lovely color changes, and I was just so excited to take this off the loom and to have a look at this beautiful fabric. And now that it's all woven up from leftovers and scrap yarn, I can call this Zanshi Ori. I wet finished this fabric in my washing machine with a little bit of dish soap just to get rid of any machine oils left from the making of the yarn, and popped it through my dryer because I wanted it pre-shrunk and ready to sew. Then I've given the fabric a really good iron and here she is looking absolutely beautiful. This would also actually make a really nice scarf if you did it like a little bit narrower. But anyway, I've worked out that I can make 2 bags from this fabric, and continuing on the leftover theme, I've rummaged around in my stash and pulled out some leftover interfacing. So I've got enough in this dark grey interfacing for 1 bag and I've got some white for the other bag. I've also got some 100% cotton leftover fabric from other projects that I can use for lining. And then I've got this other woven cotton that I used just for samples to see how things would look, and I haven't used it for anything, and I was thinking this might be perfect for the handles on the bags, so that's what I'll be using this fabric for. Then I can say that the entire bag, apart from the warp, is made from leftovers and scraps, and the length of this fabric, this sample fabric, is perfect for the handles as well. So I was really happy to get all of this planned and ready. Now it's time to sew up the bags. The first thing I did was zigzag the very end of the weaving so that the very beginning and the very end of the weaving are zigzagged. I then folded it in half to find the middle and then marked that with pins, and then found a line of weaving to follow so that I could zigzag either side of that line. Then once all the zigzagging was done, I could cut the beginnings and the ends, the scrap bits, off the weaving, and then cut the two pieces of fabric apart so that I've got two separate pieces of fabric ready to sew into the bags. I then ironed the interfacing onto both pieces of the fabric. So I've got the dark grey interfacing, which is a softer one, and then the white interfacing, which is a little bit of a firmer one. I have to say I preferred the firmer one in the end, but both of them were fine. I trimmed them up so that they were both exactly the same, and then I got my two pieces of fabric ready to sew. I then grabbed some of the 100% cotton fabric, which is old quilting fabric that I'm using for the lining, and I just very roughly cut out the lining in the same size as the pieces of fabric, because the lining pieces can be trimmed up later once the sewing, and I'll show you what that looks like as well. Next, I folded my fabric with the interfacing on it in half, with right sides together and the interfacing outwards, and then pinned the sides together, and then also did the same for the lining. So folded it in half and then pinned the sides together. Then I marked out where I wanted to sew on the actual weaving with some chalk. Using the coloured chalk on the interfacing is just perfect. It gives you a really nice straight line to sew on, and it just means that you're not going to miss any of the edges, because the edges of the weaving can be a little bit higgledy-piggledy. So once I'd marked out both sides with the chalk, I went ahead and straight stitched exactly along the chalk line on both sides that I'd made on either side of the weaving. Once that was done, I grabbed the lining and then I popped it on top of the weaving and marked out exactly where I had done the side seams on the bag and marked them with chalk. And that means that the lining is going to be exactly the same size as the actual bag. And this means it would actually just fit in the bag perfectly once I'd marked those out. I then did the lines in chalk of where to sew on the lining on both sides, and then went ahead and straight stitched that down as well. I repeated all of this with the other bag. Next, I'm going to box the corners. So I marked out a 3 centimeter box at the bottom of the weaving where the fold is. And this means that when you box the corners, it makes the bag have a flat bottom, and the bag just sits a lot nicer when there's stuff in it and there's a flat bottom. So I measured a 3 centimeter square from the sewing edge on both sides. Once it was all marked out, I was able to cut out that square on both sides. Once I've cut where I've marked in those boxes, if you pop your hand in, you'll find that you can get a perfect line up so that the edges come together beautifully, and just open up the side seam as well when you do that so that it sits nice and flat. Then just pin where you're going to sew, do the same on the other side. Then I do a straight stitch across that edge and then do a zigzag stitch on the outer edge as well so that the edges are nice and sturdy. And here I'm just going to turn the bag out right side out so that you can see what this looks like. I then repeat this entire process for the lining on both bags. And then we are ready to put the lining and the bags together. To attach the lining, make sure your bag is right sides together interfacing out and your lining is right side out. Pop your bag inside the lining and then line up the corners and the side seams together, and then pin so that it is all perfectly matching and lined up and stays together as one piece. I then measured and marked with chalk so that both sides of the bag are going to be the same length. So in this case it worked out to be 30 centimeters. So I marked 30 centimeters at each side and marked that with a bit of chalk. Once that was marked, I could then put a line from one side to the other, and that would be my fold line so that the top of the bag is even and matching with the bottom of the bag. Then I folded the top of the bag down twice onto that fold line and then pinned it in place for the entirety of the top of the bag. Then I straight stitched along that hem and fold line edge, and that is the top of the bag done. Next is the handles. So I grabbed some of the white interfacing that I had left over and ironed the interfacing onto the weaving. Once that was ironed on and cooled, I marked out 3 centimeter widths by 4 and marked those out with chalk on the interfacing, and then I was able to cut out those 4 handles ready to sew them up. To sew the handles, I folded them in half right sides together and the interfacing out and pinned them. Once they were pinned together, I was able to just straight stitch along one edge. And here is where the fun started. It didn't seem to matter how hard I pushed, I could not turn these out at all. I was trying to turn them inside out, and I was using that purple thing, trying to push them together, and it just wasn't happening. I was really cross that this wasn't happening. And then I thought, you know what, I'm actually going to just pull off the interfacing. And I thought that this would just make it a little bit easier because the interfacing was making it too thick to turn out. The interfacing had done its job. It had kept everything together so that I could cut everything out without zigzagging. But once I'd actually peeled it all off, it was really easy to turn these handles out, and they were nice and strong and absolutely perfect. So the last piece of this puzzle is to attach the handles to the bags, and we're done. I hope you've enjoyed watching this project as much as I have enjoyed making them. These bags are absolutely beautiful. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And just to let you know, my son and daughter-in-law came over the day I'd finished these bags, and she took one of those bags home because she loved them so much. Thank you as always for watching. I appreciate you all. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, and that will help to support me. Super thanks are also available. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day.